December 14, 1944, Clinton, Mississippi. Inside the wire fence of a prisoner of war camp, a German test pilot named Werner Adler sat on the edge of his bunk holding an American newspaper. His hands were steady. They had always been steady. 6 years of flying experimental aircraft for Messerschmitt had taught him that much. But as he read the headline, something shifted inside him. Something he had not felt since the moment his fighter plane tumbled from the sky over Tunisia. The headline read, "United States fighter breaks 500 miles per hour barrier." Werner laughed, not from joy, from disbelief, from something deeper than disbelief, from the certainty that comes from years of German engineering training, from thousands of hours calculating thrust ratios and drag coefficients, from the absolute knowledge that this claim was impossible. He whispered the word in German, unmöglich. The other prisoners in the barracks ignored him. They had learned to give Werner space. He was not like the others. While they played cards or wrote letters home to families that might not exist anymore, Werner worked. He filled notebooks with calculations. He sketched aircraft designs on scraps of paper. He could not stop being what he was. A perfectionist, a test pilot, a man who believed that precision conquered all problems, that German engineering represented the peak of human achievement, that the Americans with their rough methods and cowboy attitudes would never match the sophistication of the fatherland. But this headline, 500 miles per hour, Werner did the math in his head. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, the fighter he had helped develop, topped out at 426 miles per hour after years of refinement. The Focke-Wulf 190, Germany's finest achievement, could reach 440 in perfect conditions. These numbers had been won through meticulous calculation, through wind tunnel testing, through the kind of disciplined engineering process that took 18 months to produce a single variant. The Americans had entered the war less than 3 years ago. Werner set down the newspaper and stared at the ceiling of the barracks. Outside, the Texas sun beat down on the compound. Inside, doubt crept into places he had kept sealed since childhood. His father, a watchmaker in Stuttgart, had taught him a principle that guided every decision Werner had ever made. Measure twice, cut once. Perfect on paper, perfect in reality. But there was something else happening inside Werner, something he would not admit to himself for many years, a memory that would not stay buried. September 14th, 1943, 15 months earlier. Over the skies of Tunisia, his Messerschmitt trailing smoke, engine temperature climbing, ammunition exhausted. An American 47 Thunderbolt on his tail, the pilot with a perfect deflection shot. Werner had accepted death in that moment. He had fought well. He would die well. Then the American pilot waggled his wings and broke off, just flew away. Left Werner to crash land in the desert, to be captured by British troops, to be shipped across an ocean to a prison camp in Mississippi, where he now sat reading about an impossible aircraft. Werner pushed the memory away. He was good at that, pushing away things that did not fit his understanding of the world. But in his gut, beneath the calculations and the certainty, Werner felt something he had not allowed himself to feel since Stuttgart was bombed, since his parents died in the rubble of their watch shop, since everything he knew turned to ash. Doubt. What if the Americans were not as crude as he believed? What if their methods, however unrefined, actually worked? What if German superiority was not a fact, but a story he had told himself to make sense of losing everything? Werner folded the newspaper carefully. He would spend the next 3 days doing calculations, checking and rechecking whether 500 miles per hour was physically possible given what he knew about piston engines and propeller efficiency. The numbers would say yes, barely, under perfect conditions, with compromises no German engineer would accept. But possible. And if it was possible, then everything Werner believed about the world needed to be questioned. He did not know it yet, but 2 years from now, he would meet the man who flew that impossible aircraft. They would share coffee and donuts in an American diner. And Werner would learn that the pilot who spared his life over Tunisia, the one who waggled his wings and flew away, was that man's best friend. But first, we need to go back to where this story really begins. Not with a newspaper headline, not with a German prisoner questioning his certainties, but with an Iowa farm boy standing in front of an aircraft factory on Long Island, making a promise that sounded just as impossible as 500 miles per hour. November 1942, Republic Aviation, Farmingdale, New York. 2 years before Werner read that headline. 2 years before the world learned about the XP-47J Superbolt. 2 years before anyone believed an American fighter could break barriers that German science said were unbreakable. Ray Harrison stood in the hangar looking at a P-47 Thunderbolt fresh off the assembly line. Everyone called him Hap, short for happy. Go lucky, though the nickname did not quite capture what made Ray different from other test pilots. It was not that he was reckless. It was that he understood machines the way some men understand horses or dogs. He felt what an aircraft wanted to do before it did it. 28 years old, sandy hair already receding, hands scarred from years of farm work and factory labor. No engineering degree, no formal aeronautical training, just a farm boy from WWII, Iowa, who learned to fly by fixing crop dusters and barnstormer planes, who worked his way up from the Republic Aviation assembly line, who earned his test pilot slot not through credentials, but through an instinctive understanding that you cannot learn from books. His father grew corn and fixed machinery on the side. Ray grew up under the hood of tractors inside the engine compartments of any machine that needed repair. By age 12, he could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. By 16, he was keeping the local crop duster in the air with baling wire and prayer. By 20, he was in New York working an assembly line, and by 24, he was flying the planes he used to build. His philosophy was simple. Build it, break it, fix it, fly it again. The opposite of everything Werner Adler believed. Inside the Republic Aviation Conference Room, executives were meeting with United States Army Air Force brass. The P-47 Thunderbolt had just entered service that very month. Big Tough, armed with 850 caliber machine guns powered by a massive radial engine that could take punishment and keep running. It was already proving itself in combat, but everyone in that room knew the same thing. The war was accelerating. German fighters were improving. The Focke-Wulf 190 was becoming formidable. If the P-47 was going to maintain its edge, if American pilots were going to keep winning, the aircraft needed to get better, faster, more capable. The question on the table was simple. What was the maximum performance that could be wrung from the Thunderbolt airframe? Republic's chief engineer laid out the proposal. A lightweight experimental variant. Strip out everything not essential to flight. Reduce armament. Remove the rear fuel tank. Pull out the radio equipment. Install a modified engine with higher output. Redesign the cooling system. Make it as aerodynamically clean as possible. See what the airframe could really do when pushed to its absolute limit. The Army Air Force representatives leaned back in their chairs. The war in Europe was heating up. Production lines were running at capacity. The proposal sounded interesting in theory, but in practice it meant diverting resources, retooling factories, risking delays at the worst possible time. Then Hap spoke up. He was not supposed to be in that meeting. He was just a test pilot. But he had slipped in through a side door, stood in the back, listened. "I will fly anything," once he said. "Twice if it does not kill me." The room went silent. "Give me 6 months and I will show you what this bird can do." The executives looked at each other. The Army officers raised eyebrows. Here was a farm boy with grease under his fingernails promising to deliver results in half the time a formal program would take. It sounded crazy. It sounded very American. 3 weeks later, a contract was drafted. 2 prototype aircraft. Designation XP-47J. First flight target 6 months from contract signing. A German program would have taken 2 years minimum. But this was not a German program. Hap walked out of that building knowing he had just committed to something that could kill him. The modifications they were planning pushed every safety margin. Lighter airframe meant less structural strength. Higher power meant more stress. Redesigned cooling meant untested systems. Every choice was a calculated risk, except Hap did not calculate the way Werner Adler would have. Hap felt it. Intuition built from 1,000 hours of flying, from a childhood spent making broken things work. His best friend Tom Wakefield was already overseas, flying P-47s in North Africa. They had enlisted together, trained together, dreamed of flying combat together. But Tom had the discipline for military structure. Hap had the instinct for testing. So Tom went to war while Hap stayed home pushing experimental aircraft to their breaking points. They wrote letters. Tom's letters from the combat theater were matter of fact. Flew a mission today. Shot at some Germans. Got shot at back. Still breathing. The weather here is terrible. But in one letter dated September 15th, 1943, Tom mentioned something unusual. Had a strange thing happen yesterday. Got a German dead to rights. Engine smoking, no fight left. Could have finished him easy. But I let him go. Waggled my wings and broke off. Not sure why. Maybe I am getting soft. Maybe I just could not shoot a helpless man. Dad always said mercy is strength, not weakness. Hope the bastard makes it home safe. Hap kept that letter. He would keep it for the rest of his life. He did not know yet that the German pilot Tom spared was Werner Adler. Did not know that Werner was at that moment being processed through a British POW facility before being shipped to America. Did not know that their lives were already connected by that single act of mercy. All Hap knew was that he had made a promise. 6 months. One experimental fighter. Maximum performance. The clock was ticking. While Hap worked at Republic Aviation through the winter of 1942 and into the spring of 1943, while engineers redesigned cooling systems and calculated weight reductions, while metalworkers fabricated new components and mechanics assembled the prototype, Werner Adler sat in a different kind of facility entirely. The POW camp in Clinton, Mississippi was not cruel by the standards of prisoner of war camps. The Geneva Convention was observed. The food was adequate, the barracks were clean. Prisoners could work in exchange for small privileges. Werner worked in the machine shop. His skills were too valuable to waste. American industry needed machinists, even German ones. In the evenings, Werner sat in his bunk and listened to other prisoners talk. Some held on to the belief that Germany would still win, that wonder weapons were coming, that the Führer had a plan. Others had given up, accepted that the war was lost, wanted only to survive until they could go home. Werner said little. He worked his lathe during the day with the same precision he had brought to test flying. At night, he filled notebooks with calculations, not for weapons, not for the German war effort, just calculations, aircraft performance, wing loading, power-to-weight ratios, the mathematics of flight. He was trying to understand how he had lost, not just the war, but the certainty. The belief in German superiority that had carried him from childhood through his years at Messerschmitt, through every test flight, through every success. That belief had been shaken the moment an American pilot showed him mercy, had been shaken again when he saw P-47 Thunderbolts in action, big, brutal aircraft that should not have been agile, but somehow were, had been shaken every time he heard reports from the front about American production capacity, about factories churning out aircraft faster than Germany could shoot them down. And now, in December 1944, this headline, 500 miles per hour. Werner did the calculations in his cell. He used memory and scraps of paper. He checked his math 3 times the way his father taught him to check the gears in a watch mechanism. The numbers said it was possible. Barely. Under perfect conditions, with an engine pushed to its absolute limit, with weight reduced beyond what was practical, with cooling systems that would probably fail with a test pilot willing to risk his life. Possible but not sustainable. Not practical, not something that could be put into production. The calculation gave Werner some comfort. The Americans might have achieved this once, but they could not repeat it. German engineering might have lost the race to 500 miles per hour, but German discipline and sustainability would win in the long run. Except Germany had already lost the war. Werner set down his pencil and stared at the wall of his barracks. Outside, American guards walked their patrols. Inside, German prisoners played cards and smoked cigarettes and waited for a war to end that had already ended in their hearts. But for Werner, something else was ending. The certainty that had defined his entire life. The belief that measurement and precision and discipline could solve all problems. He had measured correctly, calculated, perfectly flown with absolute precision. And still he had been shot down. Still his country had lost. Still an American pilot had shown him mercy when Werner would have taken the kill. Years later, Werner would say that his real transformation did not begin the day he read that newspaper headline. It began the day that American Guard offered him a Hershey bar, and Werner, out of stubborn pride, refused it. The guard had shrugged and walked away. No anger, no insult, just a simple gesture of kindness to an enemy who could not yet accept it. That was the moment Werner began to understand that American strength was not in precision engineering or disciplined manufacturing. It was in something else entirely. something he did not have a name for yet, something that would take him years to recognize and decades to truly understand. But first, back to Long Island. Back to November 1943. Back to the moment when Hap Harrison's promise was about to be tested in the most literal and dangerous way possible. The XP-47J prototype sat on the tarmac gleaming in the cold morning light. 7 months from contract to first flight. 1 month past Hap's 6-month promise, but still faster than anyone thought possible. The aircraft looked almost identical to a standard P-47D Thunderbolt from a distance, but up close the differences were obvious. Tighter cowling around the engine. New chin scoop for the turbocharger intake. Ventral exhaust ports where the standard exhaust system used to be. No provision for external fuel tanks or ordnance. Cleaner lines. Lighter frame. 1,000 pounds lighter than a standard Thunderbolt. Ground Crew Chief Charlie Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who had come to America before the war and found work at Republic Aviation, walked around the aircraft one final time. He was old school, believed in checking everything twice. Maybe that came from being an immigrant, from knowing that one mistake could cost you everything. He found Hap standing beside the aircraft, hand resting on the wing. "She is going to handle different," Charlie said. 1,000 pounds lighter than anything you have flown. She is going to want to run wild. Hap smiled. "Then we will let her run. You sure about this?" "The exhaust system failed on the ground test last month. Nearly killed 2 mechanics. We fixed it, but still." Hap reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside was dirt. Dark Iowa soil from his father's farm. He carried it on every test flight. A ritual, a connection to home, a reminder that no matter how high he flew, he came from the ground. Charlie Hap said, "If I only flew aircraft that were completely safe, I would never fly at all." The sun was coming up over Long Island Sound. The air was cold and dense. Perfect conditions for engine performance. Republic executives were watching from the tower. Army Air Force observers had traveled from right field. Everyone knew this flight was important. Everyone knew it was dangerous. Hap climbed into the cockpit. The seat had been modified for the lighter airframe. Everything felt familiar, but slightly wrong. Like putting on a jacket that belonged to your brother. Close enough to work, different enough to notice. Pre-flight checks, fuel levels, control surfaces, instruments, engine gauges. Everything looked good on paper. Hap touched the bag of Iowa soil one more time, then signaled Charlie to pull the wheel chocks. Engine start. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine roared to life, but the sound was different. Higher pitched. Angrier. This was the C-Series variant with war emergency power capability. 2,800 horsepower when pushed to maximum. Enough power to tear the aircraft apart if something went wrong. Hap taxied to the runway. The aircraft felt eager, wanted to go. He could feel it through the control stick, through the rudder pedals, through every surface. This was not a truck like the standard P-47. This was a racehorse. Tower cleared him for takeoff. Throttle forward. The XP-47J leaped into the air. No other way to describe it. Standard Thunderbolts lumbered down the runway and climbed out steadily. This aircraft jumped. One moment on the ground, the next moment, airborne, climbing like a homesick angel, as the old pilots used to say. Hap felt his stomach drop. The acceleration was beyond anything he had experienced. The climb rate was insane. He checked the instruments. Everything green. Engine temperature good. Oil pressure good. Rate of climb, Jesus. They were going to hit 30,000 feet in under 7 minutes at this rate. First 15 minutes of the flight, Hap ran basic handling tests. Turns, climbs, dives, stalls. The aircraft responded instantly to every input. Too instantly. He had to relearn how to fly. Every movement needed to be smaller, gentler. The XP-47J was sensitive in a way the standard Thunderbolt never was. But it was also beautiful. Hap leveled off at 25,000 feet. He could see Long Island Sound below, could see all the way to Connecticut. Clear skies. No wind. Just him and this aircraft, and the question everyone wanted answered. How fast could she go? 20 minutes into the flight, Hap pushed the throttle to war emergency power. The engine note changed, deepened. The aircraft surged forward like it had been kicked. Airspeed indicator started climbing. 400 miles per hour, 420, 440. Then the vibration started. Small at first, just a buzz through the airframe, then stronger, much stronger. Hap's vision started to blur from the shaking. He looked at the engine temperature gauge. Rising, rising fast. Fire warning light. Hap's training took over. Throttle back. Check for flames. Look for smoke. The engine temperature was spiking into the red. Something was wrong with the exhaust system. The same system that had failed on the ground test. The same system they had reinforced and promised was fixed. It was failing again. 25,000 feet over Long Island Sound. Engine on fire. 1,000 pounds lighter than a standard aircraft, which meant less structural strength, less ability to absorb damage. Hap had two choices. Bail out, save himself, lose the only XP-47J prototype, end the program, prove that American cowboy engineering could not compete with German precision, or try to save it. Hap reduced power to idle. The vibration decreased, but did not stop. He put the nose down into a shallow dive. The idea was simple. Build airspeed through gravity, use the airflow to cool the engine, hope the fire did not spread to the fuel tanks. It was a farm boy solution, something he had learned fixing overheated tractors in Iowa summers. When an engine runs too hot, you do not turn it off completely. You let it run cool, let the air flow through, let physics do the work. The altimeter unwound. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. The engine temperature started dropping. The fire warning light flickered and went out. The vibration decreased to an acceptable level. Hap leveled off at 5,000 feet and turned toward Republic Airfield. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up with him. His flight suit was soaked with sweat despite the cold. He keyed the radio. "Tower, this is X-47J. I am coming in for emergency landing. Roll the fire trucks." The landing was smooth, professional. Hap taxied to the hangar and shut down the engine. Only then did his hands start trembling so badly he could barely undo his harness. Charlie pulled the engine cowling off while Hap was still climbing out of the cockpit. The exhaust manifold was cracked. 30 seconds from catastrophic failure, according to the metallurgist who examined it later. 30 seconds from an explosion that would have sent Hap into the Sound in a ball of flame. Charlie looked at the damage and let out a low whistle. German engineers would ground this program for 6 months, he said. Hap wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned. The grin was shaky, but it was there. "Good thing we are not Germans," he said. "We will have her flying again in 2 weeks." What Hap did not know, could not know, was that thousands of miles away, in a POW camp in Mississippi, a German engineer was at that very moment trying to understand how Americans could claim to build a 500-mile-per-hour fighter in less than a year. What Hap did not know was that the German whose life his best friend Tom had spared over Tunisia was filling notebooks with calculations trying to prove the American claim was impossible, failing to prove it, and beginning to doubt everything he had ever believed about engineering and precision and the superiority of German methods. What Hap did not know was that in 8 years he would meet that German engineer in front of the very aircraft he had just nearly died flying. They would share coffee and donuts. They would become friends, and they would build the next generation of American fighters together, combining German theoretical precision with American practical iteration, creating something neither country could have built alone. But that was still years away. For now, Hap Harrison stood on the tarmac at Republic Aviation legs, still shaking from the closest call of his test pilot career, and made a promise to himself. Next time he would fly her faster. Next time he would push her all the way to the edge. Next time he would see just how fast an American farm boy and a team of factory workers could make an aircraft go. And somewhere in Mississippi, Werner Adler was making his own promise. He would figure out how the Americans did it. He would understand their methods. He would accept that maybe, just maybe, German precision was not the only path to excellence. The two men had never met, did not know each other existed, were separated by an ocean, by a war, by entirely different philosophies of engineering and life. But their paths were already converging, and when they finally met, it would be over the grave of the man who connected them. Tom Wakefield, the P-47 pilot who showed mercy when he could have taken revenge, who waggled his wings and flew away, who died 1 week before Germany surrendered, never knowing that his single act of kindness would echo across decades, would transform an enemy into a friend, would prove that the real speed that mattered was not 500 miles per hour. It was the speed at which mercy travels, the speed at which hate becomes respect, the speed at which enemies become brothers. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First, HAP had to survive the test program. The XP-47J had to prove itself. Werner had to continue his slow transformation from certainty to doubt. And the war had to end before any reconciliation could begin. The story of the fastest piston fighter ever built was just beginning. And it would teach both men that sometimes the most important thing you build is not an aircraft. It is a bridge between worlds. 2 weeks after Hap Harrison nearly died at 25,000 feet, the XP-47J was flying again. The exhaust manifold had been reinforced with a different alloy. The cooling system had been modified. The engine mounts had been strengthened. Every lesson from that near disaster had been incorporated. This was the American way. Build it, break it, fix it, fly it again. December 1943 through July 1944, 8 months of intensive testing. Each flight pushed the envelope a little further. Each flight taught them something new about what the airframe could handle, about where the limits were, about how far a farm boy's instincts could be trusted when the math said you were already past the point of no return. In those 8 months, Hap flew the XP-47J 47 times. Some flights were short, 20 minutes to test a single modification. Others were long, 2 hours of high-altitude endurance testing, pushing the aircraft until the engine started showing wear, bringing her home, tearing down the power plant, learning what failed and why. The German approach would have been different. Months of wind tunnel testing before a single flight, theoretical models predicting every possible outcome, a 95% success rate because every variable had been calculated, verified, documented. But the German approach took time, 18 months minimum to develop a new variant. The Americans did not have 18 months. The war was accelerating. German fighters were getting better. The Focke-Wulf 190D, the long-nosed Dora, was appearing over Europe with performance that matched or exceeded early model P-47s. Speed was not just a performance metric. Speed was survival. While Hap tested, while engineers modified, while the XP-47J slowly evolved from a dangerous prototype into a capable research aircraft the war in Europe ground on, Tom Wakefield flew mission after mission in his standard P-47D. His letters home got shorter, more exhausted. The weather is still terrible. Lost another friend yesterday. Cannot wait to see blue Iowa skies again. Hap wrote back about the test program, about the XP-47J, about how they were getting closer to something remarkable. He did not mention the near-death experiences, did not talk about the 3 times the engine failed and he barely made it back to base, did not describe the night he woke up sweating from a dream where the aircraft disintegrated around him at 30,000 feet and he fell through empty sky knowing the parachute would not save him. Test pilots did not talk about fear. They talked about data. But in Clinton, Mississippi, Werner Adler was learning to talk about doubt. The machine shop where Werner worked was run by an American civilian contractor named Robert Mills, 60 years old, lifetime machinist, had worked in factories since he was 14. He knew precision work when he saw it, and he saw it in Werner. Most of the German prisoners treated their work assignments as punishment, minimum effort, just enough to avoid trouble. But Werner treated the lathe like he had treated his Messerschmitt test flights, with absolute focus, perfect measurements, zero tolerance for error. Mills noticed, started giving Werner the difficult jobs, gears that needed to be machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, components for aircraft engines that would fail catastrophically if the dimensions were off by even a fraction. Werner never failed. One day in February 1944, Mills stood beside Werner's lathe watching him work. The piece was a cylinder head for a radial engine, complex geometry, multiple critical dimensions. Werner's hands moved with the steady rhythm of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "You are too good to be in a prison camp," Mills said. Werner did not look up from his work. "I am in a prison camp because my country lost. Your country is not done losing yet." Werner's hand stopped. He looked at Mills. The American's face was neutral, not cruel, not gloating. Just stating a fact. Germany will surrender within a year, Mills continued. Maybe less. What are you going to do after Werner returned to his work? The lathe resumed its steady cutting rhythm. I do not know. Return to Germany, I suppose. To what, Mills asked. From what I hear, most of your factories are rubble. Your cities are bombed flat. Messerschmitt probably does not exist anymore except on paper. Werner said nothing. His hands continued their precise movements, but something in his chest tightened. Mills was right. Werner had received Red Cross letters from Germany. Stuttgart was gone. The watch shop where his father had taught him to measure twice and cut once was ash. His parents were dead. His old life was erased. Mills leaned against the workbench. You could stay here. After the war, we need skilled machinists. Aircraft industry is going to boom. You could work, make a living, start over. I am the enemy, Werner said quietly. You are the enemy, Mills corrected. Past tense. War does not last forever. People do. Werner finished the cylinder head and set it aside. He picked up the micrometer and checked his measurements. Perfect. As always. He looked at Mills. Why would Americans want a German working for them? Mills shrugged. Because you are good at what you do. Because holding grudges is expensive. Because my father came from Ireland with nothing, and this country gave him a chance. Why should you be different? Werner had no answer for that. The conversation stayed with him for days, weeks, months. The idea that he could stay in America, could work in the industry he loved, could start over rather than return to a country that existed now only in memory. But there was still the question of whether he deserved it. The American pilot who spared him over Tunisia had given Werner his life back. But Werner had done nothing with that gift except sit in a prison camp and calculate aircraft performance on scraps of paper. He had not earned forgiveness, had not proven he was worth saving. That would come later, much later. But the seed was planted. In May 1944, the XP-47J program hit its first major crisis. The Pratt & Whitney R2800C series engine was showing excessive wear. After only 10 flight hours, the power plant needed to be completely replaced. Bearings were failing. Cylinder walls were scoring. The metallurgy could not handle the sustained high stress of war emergency power. A German program would have stopped for 3 months. Complete analysis, root cause investigation, new materials testing, redesign from the ground up. Republic Aviation had 2 weeks before the Army Air Force review that would determine whether the program continued. Hap sat in a conference room with the engineering team. They had disassembled the failed engine and laid out every component on tables. The damage was obvious. Also obvious was the fact that they had pushed the engine beyond its design limits, and it had failed exactly as physics predicted it would. The lead engineer, a man named Peterson, who had a PhD from MIT and very little patience for test pilots who broke expensive equipment, pointed at the damaged bearings. This is what happens when you run 2,800 horsepower continuously, he said. The engine was designed for short bursts of war emergency power, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. You ran it for 8 minutes straight. Hap nodded, and we learned how long the engine could sustain maximum power before failure. Now we know. Peterson's face reddened. That knowledge cost us $60,000 in 2 weeks of schedule. Hap leaned forward. How much does a pilot cost? How much does it cost when a P-47 pilot over Germany pushes war emergency power and his engine fails and he dies? Better to learn the limits here than find out over enemy territory. The room went quiet. Charlie Kowalski, who had been standing in the corner, spoke up. The boy is right. We build aircraft to save pilots. We test aircraft to learn how to save more pilots. That engine told us something important. Listen to what it is saying. Peterson sighed. What it is saying is that we need a complete redesign of the lubrication system and new bearing materials that can handle the thermal stress. How long, Hap asked. 3 months minimum. We have 2 weeks, then we will fail. Hap stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the airfield. The XP-47J sat in the hangar engineless, waiting. After a moment, he turned back to the room. We do not need to fix it perfectly, he said. We need to fix it well enough to complete the test program. What can we do in 2 weeks that will get us through another 20 flight hours? Peterson started to object, then stopped. His engineer's mind was already working the problem. Not the perfect solution, the good enough solution. We could modify the oil cooling system, he said slowly. Increase flow rate. Would not solve the bearing problem long-term, but might buy us time. And we could reduce the testing profile. Shorter bursts of maximum power. Give the engine time to cool between runs. Hap smiled. See 2 weeks. Peterson shook his head, but he was smiling too. You are going to get yourself killed one of these days. Probably, Hap agreed, but not today. The modifications took exactly 13 days. On the 14th day, Hap flew the XP-47J with the new oil system in the modified test profile. The engine held, not perfectly, but well enough. In his mission report, Hap wrote, American engineering is not about building perfect machines. It is about building machines that work well enough, fast enough to win the war. Perfect is the enemy of victory. Werner Adler would have disagreed with every word of that statement in 1942. But in May 1944, working his lathe in Mississippi, hearing fragments of news about American production rates and German losses, Werner was beginning to understand that maybe Hap was right. Maybe good enough done quickly beat perfect done slowly. Maybe that was why Germany was losing. June 1944. While Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, while the war in Europe reached its crucial turning point, while American industrial might poured across the Atlantic in the form of ships and tanks and aircraft, a different kind of turning point was happening in Mississippi. Werner received a Red Cross letter. His brother, who he had not heard from in 18 months, was confirmed dead, killed during the Soviet advance into Poland. The last member of Werner's immediate family was gone. That night, Werner sat on his bunk and, for the first time since his capture, allowed himself to cry. Not for Germany, not for the war, but for the simple human loss of everyone he had loved. An American guard, a young private from Texas named Martinez, saw Werner through the barracks window. The next morning, Martinez approached Werner in the mess hall. He set down a package wrapped in brown paper. My mom sent this, Martinez said. Thought you could use it. Werner unwrapped the package. Inside was a Bible in German and a tin of homemade cookies. Why, Werner asked. Martinez shrugged. Mom says grief is grief, does not matter what uniform you wore. Werner stared at the cookies. They were peanut butter, a distinctly American creation. He had refused the Hershey bar months earlier out of pride. But pride felt hollow now. Pointless. He took a cookie and bit into it. Sweet, rich, made with real butter and sugar luxuries he had not tasted in years. Thank you, he said quietly. Martinez nodded and walked away. Werner ate 3 more cookies, then carefully wrapped the tin and put it in his footlocker. That night, he opened the German Bible and read for the first time since childhood. Not for religion, but for the connection to a language, a culture, a past that was slipping away. And as he read, Werner realized something that would not fully crystallize until years later. The Americans were not trying to destroy him. They were trying to show him that another way was possible. That mercy was not weakness. That kindness to enemies was not foolishness. It was strength. The same strength that made an American pilot waggle his wings and fly away instead of taking an easy kill over Tunisia. But Werner still did not know that pilot's name. Still did not know that his name was Tom Wakefield. Still did not know that Tom was at that moment flying missions over France supporting the Normandy invasion, 1 week away from an event that would change everything. July 1944. Republic Aviation made a decision. The XP-47J had proven itself as a research platform. The test program had generated valuable data about high-performance flight, about engine limitations, about what happened when you pushed a Piston fighter to its absolute limits. But the aircraft had never achieved the performance numbers that would justify production. Until now. The engineers had done everything possible to optimize the XP-47J for one perfect flight. A new propeller design, a General Electric CH5 turbocharger, the latest model with improved efficiency, fine-tuning of every system. This would not be a sustainable configuration, could not be put into production, but it would answer the question everyone wanted answered. How fast could the XP-47J actually go under perfect conditions? Hap spent a week preparing. He flew the aircraft daily, getting a feel for the new propeller, for how the improved turbocharger responded, for where the limits were. Each flight brought them closer to the attempt. The date was set, August 4th, 1944. Weather forecast showed perfect conditions, clear skies, cold air, no wind, everything aligned. The night before the flight, Hap could not sleep. He lay in his bunk thinking about Tom. His last letter from Tom had been dated July 20th. Short, exhausted, flying 2 missions a day supporting the breakout from Normandy. Cannot wait for this to be over. Cannot wait to come home and do something normal, like fix tractors with you. Hap wrote back, tomorrow I am going to fly faster than any fighter pilot has ever flown. Wish you were here to see it. When you get home, first round is on me, and I will tell you all about it. He mailed the letter on August 3rd. Tom Wakefield died on August 2nd, but Hap would not learn that for 3 more weeks. August 4th, 1944, 0647 hours. The sun rose over Long Island Sound, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The XP-47J sat on the tarmac, every surface polished, every system checked and rechecked, every component optimized for this single flight. Hap walked around the aircraft one final time, touched the wing, felt the cold metal under his palm. This was not just an aircraft anymore. It was a promise, a statement, a declaration that American engineering, American ingenuity, American determination could achieve the impossible. Charlie Kowalski handed Hap his parachute. The old Polish machinist's hands were steady, but his eyes were worried. Bring her home safe, Charlie said. Fast is good, but safe is better. Hap grinned. Today we get both. Republic executives were watching from the tower. Army Air Force observers had flown in from right field. The press was there, cameras ready, waiting to document either triumph or disaster. Hap climbed into the cockpit, settled into the seat. The ritual. Touch the bag of Iowa soil. Think of home. Think of family. Think of Tom somewhere over France fighting the same war from a different angle. Pre-flight checks, everything green, engine start, that beautiful angry thunder of 2,800 horses waiting to run. Tower clearance. Taxi to runway. One last check. Throttle forward. The XP-47J leaped into the air like it had been caged too long and finally set free. The acceleration pressed Hap back into his seat. The climb rate was insane. They had done this before, but never with this configuration, never with everything optimized for pure speed. 30,000 feet in 6 minutes, 45 seconds. A climb rate that would not be matched by a production fighter for another decade. Hap leveled off, checked all gauges, engine temperature perfect, oil pressure perfect, everything running exactly as it should. Below him, Long Island looked like a child's toy. Above him, the sky was dark blue, fading to black. At this altitude, you could almost see the curve of the earth. He thought about Werner Adler, about the German pilot calculating impossibilities in a POW camp, about how this flight would shatter everything Werner believed about what Americans could achieve. Time to prove it. War emergency power. Throttled to the firewall, the aircraft surged forward. The acceleration was like being kicked by God's own mule, except the kick lasted and lasted and kept lasting. The airframe vibrated, but it was a good vibration. Controlled, strong. The sound of a machine doing exactly what it was designed to do. Airspeed indicator climbing, 400 miles per hour, 420, 440, 460. The control tower was tracking him on radar. Hap could hear the excitement in the radio operator's voice. Speed 470, speed 485, speed 495. Hap's vision narrowed, not from fear, from focus. Everything in the world reduced to this moment, this aircraft, this speed. The needle climbing past 500, 503, 505, 505 miles per hour. Hap keyed the radio. His voice was steady despite adrenaline flooding his system. 505. Confirmed. On the ground, the engineering team erupted, cheering, shouting. Charlie Kowalski pounded the hood of a truck with both fists, tears streaming down his face. They had done it. A farm boy from Iowa and a team of factory workers had built the fastest Piston fighter ever flown. Hap maintained speed for exactly 90 seconds, long enough to verify the measurement, long enough to prove it was not a fluke. Then he throttled back, brought the XP-47J down to sane speeds, and turned for home. The landing was perfect, smooth, professional. But when Hap climbed out of the cockpit, his hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. His legs almost gave out. Charlie caught him, held him steady. The old machinist was grinning like a fool. "You did it, boy. You actually did it." Hap looked at the XP-47J, at this beautiful, dangerous machine that had nearly killed him half a dozen times. At this aircraft that represented everything right about the American approach to engineering. Not perfect, not elegant, but fast, effective, built by people who were not afraid to fail because failure taught you how to succeed. "We did it," Hap corrected, "all of us." The press took photographs. The Army Air Force observers shook hands. The Republic executives were already planning the publicity campaign. Fastest fighter in the world. American engineering triumph. Proof that Yankee ingenuity could beat anyone. But Hap was thinking about Tom, wishing his best friend was here, wishing Tom could see what they had built, not knowing that Tom would never see it, not knowing that 3 weeks from now, he would receive a telegram that would shatter his world more completely than any test flight ever could. For now, there was only celebration, only the moment, only the knowledge that they had done something remarkable. 505 miles per hour. The headline would appear in newspapers across America the next day, including the newspaper that would make its way to a POW camp in Clinton, Mississippi, where a German test pilot would read it and feel his certainty crumble like the walls of Stuttgart under Allied bombs. But that was tomorrow. Today was triumph. Today was proof. Today was the moment when American engineering declared to the world that the impossible was just a suggestion. Werner Adler sat in his barracks on the evening of August 5th reading the headline, 500 miles per hour. He had spent the entire day doing calculations, checking and rechecking. The numbers said it was possible, barely, under perfect conditions with an engine pushed to its absolute limit, with weight reduction beyond practical, with a test pilot willing to risk everything. The Americans had done it. Werner set down the newspaper and stared at his hands. These hands had built Messerschmitts, had test-flown aircraft that represented the peak of German engineering, had believed with absolute certainty that German precision and discipline made them unbeatable. And they had lost. Not just the war, not just the technology race. They had lost because they believed their way was the only way. Because they measured twice and cut once and never considered that maybe sometimes you had to cut twice and measure as you went. Because perfect took too long and good enough won wars. Werner walked outside into the Mississippi evening. The air was thick and hot. Nothing like Stuttgart. Nothing like Germany. Everything in America was different. Bigger, louder, more casual, less precise, but effective. Robert Mills was standing by the fence smoking a cigarette. He saw Werner and nodded. "Read about that fighter," Mills said. 500 miles per hour. Hell of a thing. Werner joined him at the fence. "It should not be possible." Mills smiled. "That is what makes it American. We do things that should not be possible, and then we do them anyway." Werner was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something he had never said out loud before. "I want to stay. After the war, I want to work in aviation again. Here, in America." Mills took a long drag on his cigarette. "Well," he said, "I expect we can make that happen. Country needs good machinists, needs people who understand precision work, needs people who are not afraid to learn new ways of doing things." "I do not know if I deserve it," Werner said quietly. "I fought against you." Mills shrugged. "You lost. War is over for you. Question is not what you deserve. Question is what you are going to do with your second chance." Werner thought about the American pilot who gave him that second chance, who waggled his wings and flew away over Tunisia, who showed mercy when he could have shown vengeance. "I'm going to build something," Werner said. "I do not know what yet, but something good." Mills nodded. "That will do." They stood together in the fading light, German and American, enemy and future colleague, separated by a fence that would come down soon, united by a shared passion for building things that flew. And thousands of miles away in a hospital in France, Tom Wakefield was already dead, killed on August 2nd during a ground attack mission. His P-47 hit by flak, crash landing in a field, dying not from the crash but from the fire that followed. His last letter to Hap was in the mail, would arrive in 2 weeks, would contain the words that would connect Werner and Hap years later over coffee and donuts in California. But none of them knew that yet. For now there was only the achievement, the headline, the impossible made real. 505 miles per hour, the fastest piston fighter ever built. And the fastest transformation of certainty into doubt of enemy, into friend of war, into peace. The speed of mercy traveled faster than any aircraft. Werner was beginning to understand that. And when he finally met the man who flew that impossible machine, when he finally learned that his life had been spared by that man's best friend, the circle would close. But first the war had to end. The celebration had to fade. The hard truth had to emerge. And the XP-47J had to prove that 505 miles per hour was not the achievement that mattered most. September 19th, 1944. Republic Aviation, Farmingdale, New York. 3 weeks after the 505-mile-per-hour flight. 3 weeks after the impossible became real. 3 weeks after the world learned that American engineering could break barriers that physics said should not break. Hap Harrison sat in his office staring at a telegram. His hands had gone numb. The words on the paper made no sense, even though he had read them 17 times. The War Department regrets to inform you that Captain Thomas R. Wakefield was killed in action on August 2nd, 1944, in the European Theater of Operations. Captain Wakefield died serving his country with honor and distinction. August 2nd, 2 days before the record flight, 2 days before 505 miles per hour, 2 days before Hap had written that letter saying, "Wish you were here to see it first round is on me when you get home." Tom would never come home. Hap set the telegram down carefully as if it might shatter. He walked to the window and looked out at the hangar where the XP-47J sat gleaming under the lights. The fastest piston fighter ever built, a technological triumph, a victory for American ingenuity, and it meant nothing. Tom had flown 73 combat missions, had survived 3 years of war, had shot down 5 German fighters, and probably saved dozens of American lives through ground attack missions supporting infantry. Had survived being hit twice, had crash-landed, once had walked away from situations that killed better pilots, then died 1 week before the breakout from Normandy succeeded. 1 week before the mission became routine instead of desperate. 1 week before the worst was over, the cruelest mathematics of war. Survive everything until you do not. Charlie Kowalski found Hap an hour later still standing at the window. The old machinist had heard. Word traveled fast in a facility like Republic Aviation. When a test pilot lost his best friend, everyone knew within the hour. Charlie did not say anything, just stood beside Hap at the window. 2 men looking at an aircraft that represented everything they had worked for, everything that suddenly felt hollow. After a long silence, Hap spoke. His voice was flat, empty. I wrote him a letter. Told him about 505 miles per hour. Told him I would buy him a drink when he got home and tell him all about it. Charlie nodded slowly. He was already dead when I wrote it, Hap continued. Already in the ground, already gone. And I was celebrating. You did not know, Charlie said quietly. Should have known, should have felt it. He was my best friend. That is not how it works. Hap turned away from the window. His eyes were dry, but his face was drawn. How does it work then? How do you make sense of building the fastest fighter in the world when it could not save the one person who mattered? Charlie had no answer for that. Nobody did. 3 days later, Tom's personal effects arrived. Standard procedure. The Army shipped home everything a soldier carried. Wallet, watch, dog tags, letters. The package sat on Hap's desk for 2 days before he could bring himself to open it. When he finally did, his hands were shaking. The watch was stopped at 14:23 hours. The wallet contained $47, a photograph of Tom's parents standing in front of their Iowa farmhouse, and a membership card for the Republic Aviation Employee Credit Union from before Tom enlisted. And there was a letter, addressed to Hap, never mailed, dated September 15th, 1943. Almost a year old. Hap opened it. Tom's handwriting was cramped and hurried, written in a tent somewhere in North Africa between missions. Dear Hap, had the damnedest thing happen yesterday. Shot up a Messerschmitt 109 over Tunisia. Pilot tried to fight back, but his engine was smoking bad, and he was out of ammunition. I had him dead to rights. Perfect deflection shot. Could have ended it in 2 seconds. But Hap, I could not do it. Could not shoot a helpless man. He was not a Nazi anymore. Not a symbol, just a guy in a broken airplane trying to get home. Same as me, same as any of us. I waggled my wings and broke off. Let him go. Watched him crash land in the desert. Hope he survived. Hope he gets to see his family again. Maybe I am getting soft. Maybe I will regret this. Maybe that pilot will get back in a cockpit and kill some American kid. But I keep thinking about what Dad always said. Mercy is strength, not weakness. Violence is easy. Kindness takes courage. I have been thinking a lot about what we are fighting for, not against. 4. We are not fighting to destroy Germany. We are fighting to prove that another way is possible, that people can build things up instead of tearing them down, that mercy matters more than revenge. Anyway, thought you would understand. You always said the best part of America is that we build things. Maybe that applies to people too. Maybe showing mercy to one enemy pilot builds something bigger than shooting him down ever could. When I get home, let us build something good together, something that matters, something that would make Dad proud. Your friend Tom. The date at the top of the letter was September 14th, 1943. Hap read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his wallet where it would stay for the rest of his life. Tom had saved a German pilot, had shown mercy when he could have shown vengeance, had waggled his wings and flown away, had given an enemy his life back. And that enemy, whoever he was somewhere in the world right now, alive because Tom Wakefield believed mercy was strength. Hap did not know that the German pilot was Werner Adler. Did not know Werner was in a POW camp in Mississippi at that exact moment. Did not know their paths would cross 8 years from now over the very aircraft that sat in the hangar below. All Hap knew was that his best friend had died believing in something bigger than war. And somehow that made the loss both harder and easier to bear. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. In Clinton, Mississippi, the prisoners received the news with mixed emotions. Some celebrated, quietly relieved that the killing had stopped. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to process that everything they had fought for, everything they had believed in, had ended in defeat. Werner Adler felt nothing. Numbness. His country was gone. His family was dead. The Germany he had known existed now only in memory, and even those memories were tainted by the realization of what his country had become, what it had done, what it had tried to achieve. Robert Mills found Werner in the machine shop. The lathe was running, but Werner was not working. Just standing there, staring at nothing. "War is over," Mills said. Werner nodded. "You still want to stay in America?" Werner looked at Mills. The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. Staying meant admitting Germany had lost more than the war. Meant accepting that everything Werner had believed about German superiority was wrong. Meant starting over in a foreign country with a foreign language, surrounded by former enemies. But going back meant returning to rubble, to ghosts, to a past that could not be rebuilt. "Yes," Werner said, "I want to stay." Mills nodded. "I will put in a word. Republic Aviation is going to need engineers. War might be over, but the aviation industry is just getting started. Jets are coming. Whole new world of flight. Could use someone who understands precision engineering." "I am the enemy," Werner said quietly. "You were the enemy," Mills corrected. "Past tense. War is over, remember?" Werner almost smiled. It had been years since he smiled. "Will they accept me, Americans who fought against Germany?" Mills shrugged. "Some will, some will not. That is the deal. You work hard, prove yourself. Eventually, most people will judge you by what you do now instead of what you did then. Not everyone, but enough. And if I cannot prove myself, then you go back to Germany and live in the rubble." Mills' voice was not unkind, just honest. Your choice. Stay and build something new or go back and mourn what is lost. Werner made his choice that day, but the paperwork took months. Technical specialist visa, character references, background checks, proof of skills. The bureaucracy of turning an enemy into a resident was extensive. While Werner waited while the legal machinery processed his application, while the war in the Pacific ended with atomic fire over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, another process was happening at Republic Aviation. The XP-47J program was being evaluated. The Army Air Force wanted answers. Could the 505-mile-per-hour flight be replicated? Could the aircraft be put into production? Was it worth the investment? Hap flew the XP-47J 17 more times between September 1944 and December 1944. Each flight pushed for maximum speed. Each flight tried to match the August 4th record. None succeeded. The best speed recorded after August 4th was 495 miles per hour. Close, impressive, but not 505. In December 1944, the Army Air Force took possession of the XP-47J for independent testing. Their test pilots were good, experienced, professional. They flew the aircraft hard. Best recorded speed 484 miles per hour, achieved at the cost of an exhaust manifold failure that nearly killed the pilot. The conclusion was inescapable. 505 miles per hour had been possible under absolutely perfect conditions, with everything optimized and a test pilot willing to push past every safety margin. But it was not sustainable, not reliable, not something that could be put into production. The meeting happened in late December. Republic executives, Army Air Force procurement officers, engineers, test pilots. Hap was there. Charlie Kowalski was there. Everyone who had worked on the XP-47J program was there to hear the verdict. The data was presented: weight savings, performance gains, reliability issues, production implications. The XP-47J had only 30% parts commonality with the standard P-47D Thunderbolt. Converting production lines would require massive retooling, months of delays, millions of dollars. And for what? An aircraft that was marginally faster than the P-47D, but significantly less reliable. Then one of the Republic executives dropped a document on the table, a report dated July 1943, 1 month after the XP-47J contract had been signed. In this report, he said Republic Aviation itself concluded that the XP-47J would likely not be worth the production effort. We recommended the Army Air Force invest instead in the XP-72 Ultra-Bolt program, a more advanced design with greater development potential. The room went silent. So you are telling us, an Army officer said slowly, that you knew this program was not going to result in a production aircraft before you even built the prototype? The executive looked uncomfortable. We knew it was high risk, but we believed the research value justified the investment. Research value, the officer repeated. $60 million of research value. Hap spoke up. Everyone turned to look at him. We proved what was possible, Hap said. We pushed a Piston fighter to its absolute limit. We learned where those limits are. We tested cooling systems and engine configurations and propeller designs that are going into the P-47M right now. We broke 500 miles per hour not because we needed a production aircraft, but because we needed to know if it could be done. And now you know, the officer said, it can be done once, under perfect conditions, by a test pilot willing to risk his life. Is that worth $60 million? Hap thought about Tom. About his best friend who died 1 week before the war, turned in their favor. About all the pilots who did not come home. About the math of war and loss and the cost of proving what is possible. I do not know, Hap said honestly, but I know this. The lessons we learned are going into aircraft that will keep pilots alive. The P-47M is faster than anything Germany has because we pushed the XP-47J past failure and learned what works. So maybe the real question is not whether 505 miles per hour was worth it. Maybe the question is, how many pilots will come home because we tried? The room was quiet. Then the Army officer nodded. Program is canceled. Second prototype will not be built. Existing aircraft becomes a research platform only. But, and he looked directly at Hap, the test pilot is right. Lessons learned here are valuable. Continue development on the P-47M. Incorporate everything the XP-47J program discovered. And that was how the fastest piston fighter ever built ended its combat career without ever seeing combat. The P-47M went into production. 130 aircraft built. Too late to intercept V-1 flying bombs over England, but fast enough to catch anything Germany put in the air in the final months of the war. 470 miles per hour maximum speed. Not 505, but sustainable, reliable, combat ready. The 47J sat in the Republic Aviation hangar, occasionally trotted out for air shows and demonstrations. A curiosity, a record holder, a testament to what happens when you push past every reasonable limit. Hap looked at it sometimes and thought about Tom, about mercy and speed and the things that matter more than either. March 1947. Werner Adler stepped off a cargo ship in New York Harbor. He carried a single suitcase containing everything he owned. 2 changes of clothes, his notebooks full of calculations, his German Bible, the tin that had held peanut butter cookies from a Texas private's mother. America. He took a train to Long Island. Reported to Republic Aviation, was processed through Human Resources, issued an identification badge, assigned to the Structural Analysis Department working on the F-84 Thunderjet Republic's entry into the jet age. His supervisor was polite but distant. His co-workers were a mix. Some welcomed him, some avoided him. Some made it clear that Germans were not particularly wanted, regardless of what skills they brought. Werner kept his head down, worked hard, did the precise engineering he had always done. Slowly, grudgingly, people began to respect him for what he could do rather than judging him for where he came from. Charlie Kowalski was one of the first to befriend him. The old Polish machinist understood what it meant to be foreign, to be different, to have to prove yourself every single day. Over coffee one morning, Charlie told Werner about the XP-47J, about 505 miles per hour, about the test pilot named Hap Harrison who flew it there. Werner listened carefully. He had done his own research since arriving at Republic, had learned that the impossible headline he read in the POW camp was real, had learned that American methods, however crude they seemed, produced results that German precision could not match. That is the pilot, Werner asked. The one who flew 505 miles per hour. That is him, Charlie confirmed. Chief test pilot now, working the F-84 program. Good man, lost his best friend in the war, still carries the grief. Werner wanted to ask more, but did not. The conversation moved on to work topics, to engineering challenges, to the problems of transitioning from piston engines to jets. But Werner filed the information away. Somewhere in this facility was the man who had proven Werner's calculations wrong, who had shown that American engineering could achieve the impossible. For 6 years, Werner and Hap worked in the same building, sometimes on the same projects, and never met. Different departments, different shifts, different worlds despite sharing the same roof. Werner worked structural analysis. Hap flew test flights. Occasionally they exchanged memos, technical notes about aircraft performance or structural concerns. Professional, impersonal. Neither knew how close they were to discovering the connection that linked them. Neither knew about Tom Wakefield, about Tunisia, about mercy shown over a desert battlefield. Not yet. September 1952, Edwards Air Force Base, California. The United States Air Force announced that the XP-47J would be installed as a permanent museum display. A ceremony was planned, press would attend, the aircraft would be commemorated as the fastest piston fighter ever built, a testament to American ingenuity during the war years. Republic Aviation was invited to send representatives. Hap was invited as the pilot of record. Werner was invited as part of the F-84 engineering team that had achieved recent successes. Neither knew the other would attend. September 12, 1952. Morning, Edwards Air Force Base Museum. Werner arrived early. He wanted time alone with the aircraft before the ceremony, before the speeches and photographs and official commemorations. He stood in front of the XP-47J and studied it with the eye of an engineer who had spent his life understanding how aircraft worked. Tight cowling, ventral exhaust ports, reduced armament, every modification designed to save weight and reduce drag. It was brilliant in its simplicity, not elegant, not the kind of sophisticated design German engineers would have created, but effective. Werner thought about the 1944 version of himself reading that headline in the POW camp. The certainty he had felt that this was impossible. The calculations he had done proving it could not work. He had been wrong, not about the math was correct, but about what the math meant. He had assumed that because something was at the edge of possibility, it could not be achieved. The Americans had assumed that being at the edge of possibility meant it was worth trying. That difference in assumption had won the war. Footsteps behind him, Werner turned, a man in his 50s, graying hair, weathered face, wearing a Republic aviation jacket. He looked at the XP-47J with an expression Werner recognized. The look pilots have when they see an aircraft they flew and survived. She is something, the man said. Werner nodded. Remarkable. I never believed it possible. Not in 1944. The man smiled. Most people did not. What is your connection to her? Werner hesitated. I was Messerschmitt test pilot. During the war, I read about this flight in a POW camp. Thought it was propaganda. Then I did the calculations and realized it was real. The man extended his hand. Ray Harrison. I flew her. Werner shook his hand. Werner Adler. I work for Republic now. Structural engineering. Hap's expression shifted slightly. Recognition. Not of the name, but of the accent, the context. No kidding. We probably pass memos to each other all the time. Probably, Werner agreed. They stood together looking at the XP-47J, two engineers appreciating the achievement. The conversation was easy, professional. They talked about specifications, about the challenges of high-speed flight, about the transition from piston engines to jets. Then Hap asked the question that changed everything. Where were you stationed before you were captured? North Africa, Werner said. Tunisia, shot down September 1943. Hap's face went pale. His hand tightened on the railing in front of the display. Tunisia, September 43. Werner looked at Hap carefully. Yes, why? Hap's voice was barely a whisper. What day? September 14th. Why does this matter? Hap pulled out his wallet. His hands were shaking. He removed a worn folded letter, handed it to Werner. Read this. Werner unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was old, creased from years of being carried. He read Tom's words, the description of the mission, the Messerschmitt with the smoking engine, the decision to show mercy instead of taking the kill. The date, September 14th, 1943. Werner looked up at Hap. His own hands were shaking now. This pilot, he said, Tom Wakefield, he was my best friend. Hap finished. Died April 1945, week before Germany surrendered. The world tilted. Werner gripped the railing to steady himself. He saved my life, Werner said. I should have died that day. I was out of ammunition, engine failing, no chance to escape. He had a perfect shot. Instead, he waggled his wings and flew away. Hap's eyes were wet. I know. He wrote about it, carried that decision with him until he died. I have thought about him every day since, Werner said. Every single day. The enemy pilot who showed mercy, who gave me my life back. I wanted to thank him, to tell him I made something of the chance he gave me. Hap wiped his eyes. You did. You came to America. You work in aviation. You build instead of destroy. Tom would have been proud of that. I wish I could tell him you just did. Hap said softly. He is listening. Somewhere. They stood together in silence. Two men connected by a third man's mercy, by a decision made in seconds over a Tunisian desert, by an act of kindness that rippled across years and oceans and war. Let me buy you a coffee, Hap said finally. There is a diner down the road. We should talk. Werner nodded, unable to speak. 20 minutes later, they sat in a booth at a roadside diner, two coffees black, a plate of donuts between them. Donuts, Werner said. Very American. Hap smiled. Tom would have ordered them. Would have bought you 3 and talked your ear off about farming. Werner picked up a donut, took a bite. Sweet, simple, American. Your friend gave me everything, he said. My life, my future, the chance to start over. I owe him more than I can ever repay. You repay it by living well, Hap said, by building good things, by showing the same mercy to someone else when the time comes. That is how it works. Mercy compounds like interest. Werner thought about Martinez and the peanut butter cookies, about Robert Mills offering him a job, about Charlie Kowalski teaching him to understand American engineering, about all the small mercies that had carried him from prisoner to colleague to friend. I want to honor him, Werner said. Your friend, Tom. I want to do something that would make him proud. Hap leaned forward. Work with me. Combine what you know with what I know. German precision and American pragmatism. Build the next generation of fighters together. That would make Tom proud. Showing that enemies can become partners. That mercy leads to creation. Werner extended his hand across the table. Hap shook it. The partnership that began that day would revolutionize Republic's engineering approach. Werner's theoretical precision combined with Hap's practical instinct produced aircraft that were both sophisticated and reliable. The F-84F swept-wing variant succeeded partly because of their collaboration. But more than aircraft, they built a friendship. Werner became a regular at Hap's family dinners, learned to appreciate baseball and apple pie and American football, taught Hap about classical music and chess and European history. In 1956, Werner married Sarah, a secretary at Republic Aviation. Hap served as best man. At the wedding reception, they placed an empty chair with a small American flag for Tom Wakefield, the man whose mercy had made everything possible. That same year, Werner and Sarah had a son. They named him Thomas. Thomas Werner Adler. Hap became the godfather. The circle was complete. The German whose life was saved by an American pilot now had a son named for that pilot. The enemy had become family. 1968. Thomas Adler, age 12, asked his father about the war. Werner told him the truth, about flying for Germany, about being shot down, about the American pilot who spared him, about his best friend Hap, who flew the fastest fighter ever built, about coming to America and starting over, and about how mercy travels faster than any aircraft. Thomas decided that day he wanted to be a pilot, not for Germany, for America, for the country that had given his father a second chance. 1972. Thomas graduated from the Air Force Academy, became an F-4 Phantom pilot, served in Vietnam, the son of a former Luftwaffe pilot flying American jets in combat. Werner and Hap attended the graduation together. Two old men watching a young man in Air Force blue. Tom would have loved this, Hap said. He is here, Werner replied. In Thomas, in all of us. Mercy does not die. It multiplies. September 1974. Werner, now 62, and Hap, now 70, returned to Edwards Air Force Base. The XP-47J was still there, still gleaming under the museum lights. Still the fastest Piston fighter ever built. Young pilots gathered around Hap asking about the flight about 505 miles per hour, about what it felt like to break barriers. She taught us that good enough beats perfect when perfect takes too long, Hap told them. But more than that, she represents what America does best. Try something bold. Fail fast. Learn. Improve. Do not let perfect be the enemy of good. One of the young pilots noticed Werner's accent, asked where he was from. Germany, Werner said. I was the enemy, fought against America, believed we were superior. We were wrong. So you worked on this, the pilot asked, gesturing to the XP-47J. No, Werner said. I worked against it. But America taught me something my country forgot. It is not about perfection. It is about people. This aircraft was built by farm boys and factory workers. It broke records because they were not afraid to fail. And when the war ended, they were not afraid to forgive. Another pilot asked, what was the real achievement? Hap and Werner looked at each other, smiled. Speed was impressive, Werner said, but not the achievement. The achievement, Hap continued, was proving that enemies can become brothers. And that is faster than any aircraft, Werner finished. They stood together, arms around each other's shoulders, in front of the XP-47J, American and German. Former enemies, current brothers, connected by an act of mercy shown 31 years earlier over a desert battlefield. The plaque on the display read, Republic XP-47J Superbolt, 505 miles per hour, August 1944, fastest piston engine fighter ever built. But the real speed record was not measured in miles per hour. It was measured in the distance from hate to friendship, from enemy to brother, from war to peace. Tom Wakefield's Mercy flew at 505 miles per hour that day in September 1943. But it was still flying in September's 1974, still flying in Thomas Adler's Air Force career, still flying in Werner and Hap's partnership, still flying in every person who heard the story and chose mercy over vengeance. The fastest thing ever built was not an aircraft. It was forgiveness. And unlike the XP-47J, which flew once at 505 miles per hour and never matched it again, Mercy's speed never decreased, never failed, never needed maintenance or modification. It just flew, forever, faster than anything else humans ever created. Werner and Hap stayed at the museum until closing, talking, remembering, honoring Tom by living the life his mercy made possible. When they finally left, they walked past the XP-47J one last time. "Thank you," Hap whispered to the aircraft, "for nearly killing me, for teaching me what matters, for bringing us together." Werner touched the wing. Cold metal, American engineering, the impossible made real. "And thank you," he whispered to Tom, "wherever you are, for the speed of mercy, for the courage to choose kindness, for proving that the fastest path forward was always together." They walked out into the California sunset. Two old men, one impossible friendship, one aircraft that changed everything by teaching them that speed was never the point. The point was always mercy, and mercy, they had learned, was the only thing fast enough to outrun hate.